Welcome to another edition of Don Hammond's Arlington Weekly News. We have a very unusual lineup this week. News, coverage of Arlington's Town Hall meeting, Community Bulletin Board, and a glance at 55 Plus News. But then there's a whole news section starting with Signs of the Times about Arlington's reaction to the death of George Floyd and the waves of emotion that have spread literally around the world. That's the show. As for social media, you can still watch us on YouTube at Arlington Weekly News and the number 1. Also on Facebook, and you can listen on the radio at WERA 96.7 FM. Now, on to the news. As of Sunday evening, June 7th, reports show the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in Arlington had exceeded 2,200. Meanwhile, Arlington's entry into Phase 2 of Governor Northam's Forward Virginia plan has been delayed in order to allow time to monitor the progress in containing the COVID-19 virus. We have a sad follow-up. Viewers and listeners may recall a story from early May involving the release of 6 inmates from the Arlington County Correctional Facility. On May the 8th, I had telephoned Commonwealth's attorney Parisa Degani-Tafti with a single question. Were these inmates tested for COVID-19 prior to their release to make sure they weren't asymptomatic carriers? At the time, Ms. Degani-Tafte said she didn't know, but she took down my email address so that she could send me better information later. Having received no response, after 13 days, I sent a reminder email on May 21st. 8 days later, I sent another email reminder and left a voicemail. Then I received an apologetic email from Ms. Degani-Tafte that provided a media contact name but didn't answer the question. When I reiterated the question via return email, she finally provided me with the answer. I quote, "Inmates are not being tested at the jail unless they experienced symptoms or direct exposure, and I understand the Sheriff's Office is monitoring exposure closely, and no inmates who have been tested have tested positive to date." She did say that the arrangement wasn't under her control, and she did answer my question. Hopefully, none of the released inmates were asymptomatic carriers going around the greater community for the past 4 weeks. Now here is a report from last Friday's Town Hall. The weekly Arlington Town Hall meeting took place on June 5th, a little after 1:30 p.m. Attendees included Christian Dorsey, Libby Garvey, Dr. Ruben Varghese, Dr. Aaron Miller, Mark Schwartz, Jim Schwartz, and Communications Director Bryna Helper. Most of the time was split between COVID-19 updates and the protests for George Floyd and against systemic racism. Recent occurrences at Lafayette Square and the recall of Arlington's police were alluded to but not discussed in detail pending investigations. More protests are planned, including a June 6th march from Arlington into Washington, D.C., sponsored by Libby Garvey and Christian Dorsey. March participants were encouraged to observe social distancing. The We Are Covered campaign, which includes distribution of badges and stickers, was discussed. These materials are intended for businesses, multifamily properties, religious organizations, and other establishments to demonstrate that they have rules and processes in place that make them safe for citizens concerned about the coronavirus. Other topics included the allowance of temporary outdoor seating at restaurants, COVID communication issues with the most vulnerable, increasing outreach to non-English speakers such as Spanish, Ethiopian, and Guatemalan residents. Libby Garvey gave what she called a shout-out to the county staff, especially for making a series of multilingual video public service announcements about how to find food and housing. They also reported that 20,000 face coverings have finally been distributed, along with maps showing outdoor seating. Dr. Ruben Varghese reported with an emphasis on a larger perspective, not just Arlington. He stated that the reduction in COVID hospitalizations from 723 on May 22nd to 538 on June 4th was a hopeful sign. Dr. Aaron Miller mentioned that more special test events like the one at Parkcroft Fitness Center had been requested. Both PCR and antibody tests are wanted. What was called our positivity rate was reported as trended down with a rolling 7-day rate of 6.9%, but it was unclear whether that referred to Arlington or all of Northern Virginia. There was another boast of being in the top 10 in testing in Virginia, but that was just based on the number of tests, not per capita. Testing can now be obtained from some private providers listed on the Virginia Department of Health site, including Preston's Pharmacy on Lee Highway. Then Dr. Varghese provided a list of items on how to demonstrate safely. 1. Wear a face covering. 2. Wear eye protection. 3. Stay hydrated. 4. Bring hand sanitizer. 5. Stay with a small group of people who you know, 10 at a maximum. 6. Observe social distancing. 7. Singing and shouting are discouraged. Signs and noisemakers are preferred. And afterwards, wash your hands, change your clothes, take a shower as you feel necessary. This is because Arlington is still dealing with community-wide transmission. As for questions about the outside versus inside event infection risk, it is based on closeness to people, whether you're inside or outside, and specifically the 6-foot social distancing applies within small groups. Arlington will provide some masks at the marches. There was mentioning of loosening restrictions at the Arlington parks, but dog parks will only reopen at Phase 2. When asked if the lockdown for the elderly was still in place, Dr. Varghese replied that it was a matter of risk. The greater the age, the greater the risk of complications. So still stay home as much as possible. Face coverings should not be considered optional. Wear them. Spikes in COVID infections are still possible, especially with the large number of people participating in the protests. Contact tracing will be easier if everyone knows the other people in their group. Other highlights included definitions. For example, local transmission means that the source of infection is known. Community transmission means that the source of infection is not known. For voting questions, viewers were sent to arlingtonva.us and told to search for absentee voting. The libraries are not open yet, but June 15th is set for the beginning of contactless pickup at Central Library. Phase 2 is delayed for gathering data, considering COVID's 14-day incubation period. We know nothing about Phase 3. Jim Schwartz said that contact tracing was expected to last through the rest of the calendar year. Bryna Helfer is working with landlords and renters in multifamily buildings and just did some new videos in Arabic, Spanish, and Mongolian. Advisory commissions include community involvement, neighboring jurisdictions, virtual meetings, hearing impaired, legal provisions, FOIA concerns, and unfortunately, the county can only broadcast one meeting at a time, not to mention the need to find captioners. Regarding demonstrations and the Arlington Police, there is a list of 8 can't-wait initiatives for police departments concerning lethal force, training, responsibilities, and accountability. Arlington's police have reviewed their own policies and rate themselves at 7.5. It was pointed out that body-worn cameras didn't save George Floyd. Returning briefly to the events of Monday, June 1st, it was pointed out that Lafayette Park is big and that one end of the park may have had a different experience from the other end of the park. The decision to recall Arlington's police from Washington, D.C. was based on a sudden change of mission from what was originally agreed upon. Libby Garvey said that nobody knew that the objective was a photo op. Beyond that, COVID precautions were recapped, and then the meeting concluded at 1:44 p.m. The next story is a kind of lesson on how not to promote something. We received an email from the Arlington Public Library on June 3rd warning that a system upgrade at the library would begin on June 4th. There would be intermittent interruptions on online library services like the library catalog, e-collection, and fine payment. The upgrades are scheduled to be completed by June 15th. Additional news about how the upgrade would affect user accounts was promised for an unspecified date, but no specifics were given. Most significantly, there was no mention of whether or not the upgrade will provide any improvements for patrons. Most people expect some kind of reward for being patient through a period of inconvenience. Meanwhile, Mark Riley, also known as Arlington's Big Turkey from the Turkey Trot, wants it to be known that he has extended his fund drive on behalf of Phoenix Bikes until at least July. Phoenix Bikes is a non-profit organization that teaches local teens how to repair and build bicycles while encouraging values such as hard work, initiative, and perseverance. Those wishing to donate online can go to Give Lively, that's GIVE-Lively.org/Mark-Riley-S-campaign-for-Phoenix-Bikes. There have been 50 donors so far. Now it's time for the 55-plus news. Once again, we have an update to nothing. The 55-plus website remains empty, and that's all we have for this week, except to continue to encourage safe behavior. Longtime viewers and listeners have probably noticed that Don Hammond's Arlington Weekly News has a limited scope. As the name suggests, it's a show about Arlington, and we tend to leave the task of national and international news to others who have the resources to do a better job than we can. However, sometimes there are national and international news stories that come home to Arlington. The coronavirus epidemic is one. The George Floyd tragedy is another. While some people may like to think that such a thing won't happen here, the emotional effects of what did happen are clearly in evidence. For this first segment, I'm taking a narrow look at one aspect of those effects. I call it Signs of the Times. The first graphic I noticed was a chalk message on the Bluemont Connector Trail where it intersects with Illinois Street. It simply said, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, say their names, Black Lives Matter, educate, learn, support. A walk along Washington Boulevard from George Mason Drive to the Westover Shopping Center turned up more signs. These were 8.5 by 11-inch sheets of plain printer paper, and they were attached to telephone poles, lamp posts, and the flagpole at the Westover Post Office. One of the messages read, You are contributing to the killing of black people by not stopping the killing of black people. Do something about it. Change the narrative of America. Text Floyd to 55156. Then it gave a hashtag, Sign of Justice, and then signofjusticeproject@gmail.com. Another message read, Killer cops will not go free. Text Floyd to 55156. Do not live in ignorance. Use your privilege for good. Followed again by hashtag Sign of Justice and then signofjusticeproject@gmail.com. A third message said, A man was lynched by the police. What are you doing about it? Text Floyd to 55156. Use your privilege for good. Hashtag Sign of Justice, signofjusticeproject@gmail.com. Then there was a fourth message that said, DMV landscape, just in time for spring. Mulch weeds and other services, and went on to provide a phone number and website before closing with quality work, reasonable price, free estimate. It was there. The next sign seemed to be back on topic, but had a different source. It said, If you don't fight systemic racism, you sustain the system. Text JUSTICE to 668366, hashtag Black Lives Matter. There were 2 or 3 iterations of each of these signs, plus a couple of other signs offering guitar lessons. But as I was returning to the north side of Washington Boulevard and George Mason, I found a sign that provided the most detail. It had a portrait of George Floyd and smaller print with more detailed information. It said, "Do something. Vote for politicians who want police reform. Donate to Reclaim the Block. Educate yourself and others. Text Floyd to 55156 to sign petition. Have difficult conversations. Donate to North Star Health Collective. Call Minneapolis Mayor at 612-673-2100. Call Minneapolis District Attorney at 612-348-5550 for everyone like him." This detail, especially about the petition, would be helpful for anyone wondering what their text would accomplish. One line that appeared more than once was, "Use your privilege." There was no mention of who was presumed to have privilege, but it made me wonder what kind of messages were being put up in South Arlington, including the Knock community. So I went there next. I could find no such signs in Knock itself, but there was one across Walter Reed Drive at 19th Street South. It was another copy of the "Killer Cops Use Your Privilege" message. Traveling up Glebe Road, I saw another Killer Cops sign between 8th Street and 9th Street South, and there was a sign I couldn't read from my car at North Henderson and Glebe because there was no place to park immediately nearby. What I couldn't help noticing was that none of the signs were large enough to read from a moving vehicle. They would be visible to pedestrians only. I only saw one sign that had been partially torn down in front of a business. I think it was torn down by a passerby or a customer, since a business would have been careful to remove it completely. I leave the interpretation of these messages and their placement to our viewers and listeners. Such things are not without historical precedent. In 1871, an editorial cartoon by Thomas Nast was believed to have contributed to the downfall of the Tammany Ring. It featured a snarling caricature of the Tammany tiger crouched over the corpse of Columbia, the symbol of the nation, and it bore the caption, "What are you going to do about it?" Also, around 1970, a button went into circulation that said, "If you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem." Some identified it as an old African proverb, but it was also attributed to Eldridge Cleaver, who helped popularize the phrase. The actual authorship of the Arlington signs remains unknown. However, people who follow the instructions and text Floyd to 55156 will be taken to a petition that was created by a 15-year-old Oregon resident named Kellen Sims. The petition recounts the circumstances of George Floyd's death and then provides the active demand, and I quote, "I'm calling on you, the mayor, to 1. Block their pensions, and 2. Ban them from becoming police officers ever again. And County Attorney Freeman and Attorney General Ellison must immediately charge all 4 officers with murder." Unquote. These were the terms specified in the original petition. More recent visitors to the website would also see an update dated June 3, 2020. Again, I quote, "The remaining 3 officers who stood by and did nothing to stop former Officer Derek Chauvin from killing George Floyd have been charged with aiding and abetting murder. And finally, Chauvin's murder charges have been upgraded to the 2nd degree. This is a testament to our movement to end police violence and white supremacy." Unquote. No credit was given to Attorney General Keith Ellison, himself an African American, for actually bringing the charges and pledging his efforts to secure convictions. The update also expands the stated scope of the goals beyond the original petition. It says, "Our rallying cry is clear. Black Lives Matter, invest in our communities, and defund the police." Meanwhile, an article in Business Insider provided some unhappy revelations. A Change.org petition that calls for justice for George Floyd became the most signed U.S. petition in the site's history, racking up over 11 million signatures. After people sign the petition, Change.org urges them to become a hero by donating money to get the petition on the agenda. However, donations made through the site don't go to petition organizers or Floyd's family. Instead, Change.org keeps the money, which it says is used to promote the petition on Change.org's own site and elsewhere, and to cover other operational costs. A Change.org spokesperson told Business Insider that the company spends the money raised from petitions to further circulate petitions and on operating costs for Change.org's site. The George Floyd petition is being featured in a Change.org ad campaign displayed on 118 digital billboards across the U.S. Of course, the billboards direct readers to donate to Change.org. According to a spokesperson for Change.org, the money raised from petitions goes toward helping the campaign win and helping us build and maintain our technology platform, making it possible for us to provide people with the tools they need to win the change they want to see. Change.org is a for-profit, venture-backed company that hosts activist petitions written by members of the public, gathers email addresses from signees, and encourages people to circulate the petitions heavily on social media. They prompt visitors to choose between $3, $25, $50, or $100 donations. Smaller text below the donation buttons clarify that the money will be used to advertise the petition on Change.org's own website. Perhaps what's needed now is another petition to Change.org demanding that they turn over at least the majority of their donations to the Floyd family. Meanwhile, I would encourage anyone who wants to donate to first make sure they know where their money will be going. Following rumors of looting at the Apple Store in Clarendon, I visited the area a few times after each demonstration and took some footage. I also asked a groundskeeper if there had been any damage. There had been none. The footage I took of all the boarded-up storefronts seemed to me not to be so much a sign of citizen unrest as a demonstration of corporate paranoia. Longtime viewers and listeners may have noticed that we seem to be living in an age of news and commentary as opposed to just news. But here, we will simply play a recording from Saturday morning, June 6th, at the intersection of North Glebe Road and North Randolph Street. And that concludes this week's show. We will be back next week with more news from Arlington, along with some more on-the-ground observations. Meanwhile, be careful, be safe, and be well. And now for our TV viewers, here's an encore presentation of Craig Nolan performing his song, It Ain't the Heat.
It ain't the heat, it's the humidity that'll get your attention. Out on the street, it's stupidity if we fail to mention that it's hot, hot, hot in Washington, capital of the nation. Yeah, it's hot, hot, hot in Washington. Go grab a cold libation. Hot, hot, hot in Washington, mid to upper 90s. Yeah, it's hot, hot, hot in Washington. Tear off those tidy whities. If you have to work out in the heat, drink lots and lots of water. You can take your shirt off but be discreet. It'll only make it hotter because it's hot, hot, hot in Washington, capital of the nation. You know it's hot, hot, hot in Washington. Go grab a cold libation. In the office air, it's nice and cool. You found a place to hide. If you're freezing there, don't be a fool. Just take a step outside because it's hot, hot, hot in Washington, capital of the nation. You know it's hot, hot, hot in Washington. Go grab a cold libation. Yeah, it's hot, hot, hot in Washington, mid to upper 90s. You know it's hot, hot, hot in Washington. Rip off those tidy whities. If you have to work out in the heat, drink lots and lots of water. You can take your shirt off, don't be discreet. It'll only make it hotter because it's hot, hot, hot in Washington, capital of the nation. You know it's hot, hot, hot in Washington. Go grab a cold libation because it's hot, hot, hot in Washington. Grab